What's up everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a potential date for the Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson lightweight clash, Israel Adesanya, the middleweight champion, on Jon Jones, and much more. Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson could take place in May at UFC 274. There's been a lot made over the last few months of a potential clash between Tony Ferguson and Michael Chandler. Tony has called out Chandler, while Chandler has confirmed that they're in talks with the UFC to set this fight up. Well, now it seems that the UFC is looking to put this fight for the May 7th UFC 274 card, which will take place in Phoenix, Arizona. While the contract has yet to be signed, multiple reports online state that the two sides have verbally agreed to the May 7th event. The 35-year-old Chandler is ranked 5th in the UFC lightweight rankings and has lost back-to-back fights, though they are against the current champion, Charles Oliveira, and number one contender, Justin Gaethje. His last fight was the fight of the year for 2022, so it's not like Chandler's on a real skid, and he has the chance to get back to title shot contention if he can string together a few impressive wins. He could start by beating someone like Tony Ferguson, the number 7th ranked lightweight fighter and former interim lightweight champion, who never got the chance to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov for the undisputed title. Still, El Cucuy has lost 3 of his last fights, all to top-tier competition, including the same fighters who beat Chandler in Oliveira and Gaethje. We haven't seen Ferguson in the octagon since he lost to Beneil Dariush in May of last year, but the 38-year-old is as tough as they come and had won 13 fights in a row at lightweight prior to his recent skid. The main event for the UFC 274 card is the lightweight title fight between Oliveira and Gaethje, and having this be the co-main event just before that bout would make a lot of sense. What do you think about the UFC putting this fight on the UFC 274 card? And who do you think will have their hand raised after this one? Israel Adesanya blasts cop car headbutter Jon Jones. Israel Adesanya was recently on TMZ Sports to talk about a range of things, and he took the opportunity to discuss a bit of recent Jon Jones news. Jones, the former light heavyweight champion, looking to move up to heavyweight, has not fought in just over 2 years on account of his big plans of moving up to heavyweight simply not materializing. Plans to fight Francis Ngannou fell through last year, and Jones is simply still training. But things changed for the worse when he was arrested outside of a Las Vegas hotel for misdemeanor domestic battery late last year. While charges were later dropped, the video of the arrest was recently released by Las Vegas PD, and it shows Jones simply lashing out at cops and then later headbutting a cop car while in handcuffs. That's the context behind Adesanya's words when he said this.
I'm glad I can be invited to TMZ. I'm not here getting looked up for the wrong reason and being put on TMZ. And some crazy video of me, I don't know, banging my head on a cop car or something crazy like that. You know, I'm glad that's not me.
Later in the interview, Adesanya said that Jones had been the person to talk about Izzy first, calling him out. Adesanya went on to say that Jones needs to go back to church and to fight his demons. Jones had called out Adesanya previously. Ultimately, Adesanya moved up to challenge light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz and lost. But there's still that feud between Jones and Izzy that has both fighters always taking shots at one another through social media or interviews. But what do you think about Izzy's latest shot at Jones? And do you think we'll ever get to see Adesanya and Jones fight it out in the octagon at light heavyweight? Jan Blachowicz and Sean Strickland air out their thoughts on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. MMA fighters are now weighing in on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and MMA Twitter is grabbing their popcorn. UFC middleweight Sean Strickland came out on Twitter to say that Ukraine should, quote, bend the knee to Russia. This is what Strickland said about the situation. Ukraine should just bend the knee and become Russian. I understand it sucks, and yes, you could win, but do you really want to be the new Afghanistan for the next 30 years? Not saying it's right, but this hard pill to swallow will be better in the end. This prompted former light heavyweight champion and Poland native Jan Blachowicz to weigh in with his own thoughts in response to Strickland. This is what he said. Would you? It's easy to give away someone else's independence. The history of the Eastern European region is full of struggle and suffering. Ukraine, as a country and as a people, has endured much. Their resistance is understandable and admirable. Freedom. The debate then intensified, with Strickland then responding to Jan by saying this. 35 days for Germany to take control of Poland. The only reason why there is a Poland is World War II. Poland is not Ukraine. Their children's children will be living in the rubble of Ukraine's struggle under a Russian flag in 5 years. That is the cost. Russian sanctions are Ukraine sanctions. Then Strickland went on to say this as well. That is the last thing I'll say on the subject. Mark my words, what I say will come true. Tell people to struggle, tell people to fight. Their children's will live in poverty and destruction under a Russian flag. This is the reality. Hard truths, I know. Strickland's words created quite a stir on social media, but they aren't the only ones to talk about Russia-Ukraine crisis. Bryce Mitchell, a UFC featherweight who just beat Edson Barboza last week at UFC 272, made headlines when he stated his thoughts on the whole thing. But what do you think about this exchange between Strickland and Blachowicz? Don't forget to take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all of the latest fight news. Ben Askren rips Jorge Masvidal following loss to Kobe Covington. Ben Askren and Jorge Masvidal have no love lost. Masvidal knocked out Askren back in 2019 in a fight that had a lot of buildup given all the trash talk between the two fighters. Masvidal ended up delivering a flying knee KO to Askren in just 5 seconds, the fastest knockout in UFC history, and helped propel him to superstardom. To commemorate that moment, Masvidal got a tattoo of his flying knee just over his left collarbone where the shoulder and chest meet, which was clearly visible during the ceremonial weigh-ins for last week's main event fight for UFC 272. Askren, while on the MMA Hour this week, was asked about his thoughts on the tattoo, and this is what Funky said.
It's terrible. It's really like, oh God. It just looks like crap. Like, that's something like a teenager gets and you're like, oh, I thought that was going to look a lot better. I thought this was going to be really bad, but it looks kind of dopey.
Are you honored?
Rich, he could go get the best tattoo artist in the place.
Askren clearly wasn't impressed by the ink work on Masvidal, but later he went on to say that he also didn't care for much of Masvidal's talk about Kobe, saying he wanted to fight him given that Masvidal had just lost a pretty lopsided decision to his former friend. Still, what do you think about Askren's comments here? Robert Whittaker hints at a possible June fight, says he wants another title run at 185 before moving up. Robert Whittaker is striving to get back to the title shot picture in the middleweight division, and he's not looking to move up in weight anytime soon, though it is in the plans eventually. Whittaker made waves when he tweeted about that Skinny Rob was coming back sooner than expected, as fans online took this and went off with all kinds of speculation that he's moving down to welterweight. But what he really meant was that since his last fight against Israel Adesanya a few weeks ago, he's been eating and enjoying his life, but will get back into training camp for a potential clash against another middleweight contender sooner than later. He clarified his words while on the MMA Hour this week, laughing and joking, saying people were simply taking him out of context, and saying that there's no way he's moving down in weight. Whittaker is a former middleweight champion, and as such, he says he wants to give the 185-pound division another go before ultimately doing the inevitable. This is what he said to Ariel Helwani recently on the MMA Hour.
My strength versus cardio versus speed is just on point. I feel like I lose some of that if I move up to 205. So it might be, I don't know. Well, I think I'm going to try and just work my way up to a title shot here one more time and then play with the idea afterwards.
Whittaker has stated in the past that he'd most likely move up in weight at some point, but for now, he's focused on getting back into title shot contention. It took him 3 straight wins to get a rematch against champion Adesanya, and while he did better in his second fight with the champion, going all 25 minutes, he lost the decision to Stylebender. As for what's next, he was pretty coy about who his next opponent would be, although he did state it would be a top contender whom he hadn't fought yet, which led Ariel to speculate that it could be Marvin Vettori and possibly in June. But we'll have to wait and see if that's going to be the case. What are your thoughts on Whittaker planning to make another run at the middleweight title? And how do you think a fight against Vettori will go for Whittaker? Who do you think would win that fight? Thanks for joining us today and catching up on all things MMA. What do you make of what's going on in the fight world? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all the latest news from the MMA Zone. See you next time.